Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my channel. This is Morgan Lopez for Ram Media, and today we're going to be discussing the difference between charity and welfare. Is there a difference? It would appear that most people don't seem to know that there is a difference, and as such this has caused an enormous amount of problems. Stay tuned. Okay, so we're going to be discussing, as I mentioned, the difference between charity and welfare. Is there a difference? And what does it all translate to? Because we hear a lot about in the news today. There's a lot of tumult where people criticize what we call the welfare state, that most Western countries have become nanny states and all of these sorts of things, where there's this criticism that the government takes in money for charitable causes and does nothing but squander it, and the criticisms are that it's not helping anyone at all. And then you have people going on demonstrations. In fact, just earlier this week, I was invited to, because I'm a member of a group on Facebook that is dedicated to helping sort of homeless people sort of think about things, think about their situation and all that sort of thing, to try help them out a little bit. It's actually run by a friend of mine who I actually met on the streets. He was destitute for some time, and one day I was actually on my way to church. One day I said, well, I'll be late for church. I just stopped on the street and had a chat with him and ended up becoming friends with the guy. And he told me all about what it was like to be destitute and homeless. A young guy, really. He's a young guy, and it was an interesting conversation to have with him and stuff like that. And sort of tried to help him out where I could. And it's a tough situation. He still struggles with a couple of things and stuff like that. But I was invited by a member of this group to go and to a protest. And in the protest, they want to appeal to the government, to say the government is not doing enough to help homeless people and all of these sorts of things. So this is not a sort of topic that one can approach in a flippant way, because there's real people, there's real lives at stake. This is not merely an intellectual, theoretical sort of thing. This is real people with real sufferings and real problems and all of that sort of thing. So we gotta approach it in a very, very serious way. Because at the end of the day, I think most people would agree that, when you see someone that's having a hard time, your first inclination is you want to help them out somehow. And a lot of the times, if we don't end up doing so, it's because we have no idea what we can actually do about it and all that sort of thing. So those are some of the competences involved. But today, I'm wanting my thesis is, and this is what I'm going to propose to you guys today, is that there is a very, 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 very big difference between charity and welfare. Now, basically put, charity is something that is done by Christians, by religious orders and things like that, typically characterized, if you think about that, historically this has always been the case. And charity, basically speaking, if the reason why Christians use that word is if we actually go to the Bible for the references, right? If we go to the Bible for the references, we see that the word charity is used a lot. Now, the word charity that the Bible uses, the word charity is actually the Greek word agape, which is one of the words for love, right? So charity is actually another word for love. And this is the interesting thing. Even in English, it's no longer in use in common English parlance. Because for us, when you say the word charity, you immediately think of an institution that's going out there to help disadvantaged people. But the word charity, even in English, actually means love. Well, at least it did in the old days, but it's sort of changed a little bit. And a lot of places in the Bible, in the newer translations of the Bible today, where they use the word love, love is actually incorrect. The correct word that should be used there is charity, because it's got a very, very different connotation even though charity and love is the same thing. So if you think about in the Greek language, they have about 5 different words for love. So you've got agape, eros, phileo, and so on and so forth. And each one, they're all love, but they deal with very, very specific things. They're not the same thing. So eros is the kind that a man would feel towards a woman, and vice versa. Is a sort of a sexual romantic type of thing. Agape is something towards your friends. It's the brotherly love, so to speak. And then your phileo is more I might get this one wrong, is more with your family, your father, your parent, your mother, your parents, your siblings, and things of this sort. So they've very, very different connotations, and they're not all the same. So when the Bible is talking about charity, this is the word that it's talking about is agape, which basically means affection. If it's translated by, if you go to the Strong's Concordance, Strong's G26 is the reference there, agape, and it is the translated, or should I say, the outline of biblical usage is the following: affection, goodwill, love, benevolence, brotherly love. So the Christian idea of charity is that when you see someone who is having a tough time of things, that out of an internal love and pity for your fellow man, you out of your own volition, you approach this individual to help them out in some way. And it's not an exclusively financial thing. It's time. Sometimes it's just to lend an ear. Sometimes a person just needs to talk about things. Sometimes it's wisdom. You can give them advice. It's not always just about throwing money at a situation. And the Bible's very explicit about these kinds of things. You know, money is not the solution to everything, right? And this is why with charity is specifically wrapped around the philosophy of love for your fellow man. It is your own volition to go and you see someone who's destitute or is in need of help. Doesn't have to only just be a homeless person or whatever. Anyone who's in any kind of problem, whatever the case might be, even if they are living at home and they have a home, they're not homeless, but they're living at home and there's problems in the home, you approach them and you try to help them out and give them advice and try to, it's a community, it's the family looking after its own, and by extension the community looking after its own people. It's individual to individual, right? And you out of your own time, out of your own efforts, out of your own emotional and intellectual resources, out of your own financial resources as you're able to. So that's the Christian concept of love. And you can go and even have a look at when the Bible is talking about charity. If I go to, for example, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, right? It gives a good idea of what we're talking about when we're thinking about charity, right? So starting at 1 Corinthians 13 verse 1, I go, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, I become a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. Right? So if you are the tongues of men, right? You can speak multiple languages and you can go out and talk a good talk, right? You've got a good message and all these sorts of things. But if this is not actually motivated by love, by actual love, it says you become a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. You're just a nuisance in the people in the ears of people. And this is precisely what political activism has become, right? Political activists are not motivated by charity. They're motivated by political interests, personal political interests, and that is then where the difference lies. 1 Corinthians 13 verse 2, the next verse. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. So again, if love does not underlie every single thing that you do, and if love is not the motive for which you do things, you're nothing, you're useless, and you're going to become corrupted very, very quickly. Verse 3, and though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. right? So you can bestow all my goods you can throw money at the problem. But if there's no actual love for your fellow man, right, for all you know, you could actually be, by throwing the money at the people, for all you know, you're actually just making the problem worse by just giving money in an unrestricted way. You could be corrupting the person, right? We see from people that win lotteries, right? A person wins a lottery, now that all of a sudden they have all of this money to do whatever they want with, and then within a few short years they're in the gutter, worse off than they were before, having lost all friends and family, probably start doing drugs, because now the barrier, because not having money can sometimes form a barrier. The lack of money and resources can be a barrier between you and your bad habits, right? And those bad habits, if that financial barrier is removed, and if you have no personal ability in terms of your character and impulse control to prevent yourself from those bad habits will run your entire life, and you'll end up like a lot of people do, in the gutter, having just allowed those pathologies and those issues that you have to just run you to death and wreck you completely and ruin your life. Verse 4. Charity suffereth long, and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. This is definitely not something that you can say about political activists. If you just listen to the way they speak. There was an individual. Who was it? I'm not sure if it was. I can't remember who it was, so I'm not going to say who it is. Maybe one of you. I can't remember off the top of my head. It says, speaking about socialists, he says, socialists don't love the poor. They just hate the rich. They don't actually love the poor. They just hate the rich. And that's exactly what you see in the world today. You always hear about, we hate the rich, and down with the rich, and tax the rich more, and do... And this, and just going on about the rich all the time, and we love the poor. Meanwhile, most of the people who are in these activist movements, what they don't tell you is they themselves are receiving ridiculous amounts of money in order to be able to make a profession out of being an activist, right? Being an activist is actually a profession, whether people would like to admit it or not. You can be a professional activist, and it's very, very lucrative. You can make a lot of money being an activist, especially if whatever it is that you're campaigning for garners the special interest of private interest groups that are willing to throw millions at you. For example, Black Lives Matter. Something like $10 million they got in funding from George Soros, right? Who is one of those, sort of speculators, and he crashed the Bank of England, so they said. Is not a nice guy at all, and he's been implicated in a lot of social engineering and social unrest. He throws money at the problem, and he makes these things happen. It takes money to go out and be an activist and all that sort of thing. And what is the end result? End result is not always exactly what people claim it to be. And they're arrogant, and they're violent, and it's not long. They're not. It says here, suffereth long, is kind. Charity envieth not. All you hear is about, look at what those people have. Look at what those people have. The grass is greener on this other side. So in order to make our lives happier, we need to have what they've got. So let's go and get the government to take it from them in order to give it to whom we deem worthy, who we deem is the oppressed, who we deem is whatever the case might be. Right? It's covetousness, basically. Right? Charities today, in a lot of ways, not charities, the political activists and the welfare inspired, a lot of it is covetousness. Doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil. I mean, you hear, again, people like Black Lives Matter, either we get our way or we're going to start using the bullet. or we're going to start, burn the Constitution, or we're going to start shooting people and killing people, going out and rioting in the streets, smashing things and burning things up. Same thing with feminism, right? They claim to be for women because they love women, and they're in it for women out of a care for women's rights and all that kind of stuff. Well, what do? They go on these slut walks and they chant and the profanity they actually end up spitting on everything that is good about femininity. And it's and the way they carry on, that they're screaming and shouting and the hysteria, it's completely unbecoming. I mean, feminism, even if you could make the argument that feminism at some point had a legitimate cause to exist, it's now become nothing but a joke, an absolute joke that people make YouTubes out of these feminists running around topless, screaming at the top of their lungs these incoherent mantras and things like that. And they claim, we're doing this for women. And you got to think, are they really doing it for women? Because you never hear them speak about the women that are being oppressed in the Middle East or Africa, for example. You hear nothing about that. Women being forced, the lives of women in countries that are not Western countries, third world countries, where the religions dominate in those countries, and the way they oppress women, where they're not allowed to drive, or they get beaten for going to the shop to buy bread on their own. Or if they get raped, it's their fault, and they get put to death. You don't hear the feminists say anything about this. Where's the love for those women? Right? It's because it's not motivated by charity. It's not motivated by actual love for the condition, for the plight of women. Not by any stretch of the imagination. It's motivated by selfishness, by political interest, and that's it. They want political power. Here's the thing, right? These people, they complain that so-and-so has power. The white male patriarchy has the power. And power is bad and power is evil. Here's the thing about these people. They do not actually have a problem with power. They just believe the wrong people have the power. So by complaining, they hope to get the power on their side so that they can do whatever they want and bring out whatever utopia it is that they imagine. Right? So they don't actually have a problem with money and power and all of these things that they complain about. And patriarchy, well, because it's not that the one gender dominates, apparently, because there's not, none of that sort of rubbish goes on. They want to make a matriarchy. But who's to say that a matriarchy would be better? So it's not that they don't have a problem with one gender dominating. They just believe that it's the wrong gender that's dominating. So they're getting nothing right. They just want to shift the balance of power to where they believe it's more appropriate. Here again. Verse 6. Rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in truth. Absolutely nothing that these activist groups promote, right? When they go out to get the government involved in order to bring about social justice, nothing that they promote is truthful, right? They bend statistics, they bend the truth like something fierce. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a case. And it says here, rejoiceth not in iniquity. So, for example, you talk about, let's go back to feminism, right? Women's rights. But they say nothing about the porn industry. Absolutely nothing about the porn industry, right? They say nothing about the sanctity of marriage. No, let women go out and be as promiscuous as the men have always been, and so what if they get STDs, and so what if they get pregnant? They can just go and get it aborted. They can just go and kill off the inconvenient child that has come along. This is not motivated by love. At all. These things are not motivated by charity in the slightest. Beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Now when it says it believeth all things, this is not an indiscriminate, I just believe in everything. It's specifically talking about doctrine. Charity never faileth, but whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall fail. They shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. So charity is something, is the only thing that'll last. Where it says it never faileth. I mean, these charities, think about, let's go back to the welfare state, right? The UK government. I'm going to talk about the UK government because I actually live in the UK. Let's talk about the UK government. This is going to blow your mind. The UK government spends 35% of government spending is spent on welfare. 35% of all government spending is spent on welfare. For the financial year of 2017, the UK government spent $264 billion on welfare, which made 34% of all government spending. Now here's the difference between welfare and charity. Charity is a personal conviction. I reach into my own pocket of money, of time, whatever, in order to go and help people, my fellow man who I can see. There's a personal touch to it, right? It's people within my immediate community, people who we know if the community wasn't dysfunctional. Society today, our communities are dysfunctional. Most of us don't even know our neighbors and don't care to. We don't know the people in our community anymore. But charity is me out of a love and a concern for my fellow man. I reach into my own pocket of resources, be it time, emotion, money, whatever the case might be. I reach into my own pocket of resources and I go to my fellow brother or sister to help them. Welfare is the government holding you at gunpoint and forcing you to hand over your money, however much it is that they believe is necessary. You have no say in the matter whatsoever. Is the government by force taking your money from you to spend it on whatever they deem necessary, whether it works or not. And the government, if the program fails, they never blame it on the fact that they were incompetent. They always say, well, it's because we didn't have enough money, so just give us more money. Right? Have you ever heard a politician admit that they failed because they actually were just ignorant and squandered the money and misappropriated the money and that there was corruption? No, never do that. What? It failed. Why did it fail? Or because we didn't throw enough money at it, so give us more money. It's never because of incompetence. There's no personal responsibility. Charity is personal responsibility. I take my own money, and because it's my own money and time, I use it judiciously to actually help a person go out and stand up on their own 2 feet so that they can have some sort of dignity in life, so that they can, because that's what you get from standing on your own 2 feet. You go out and help these people out. And because it's a personal thing, you get to know the individual, you get to know what the individual's actual problems are, so that you can help the individual in a way that will actually help them in their particular circumstance. It's not so with the government. It's just throw money at a problem. It doesn't care about the individuals, right? And the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of the money that the government brings in for the sake of welfare, most of it is spent on administration. It doesn't actually get to the people who need it. And when they create programs, the programs are generalized. It doesn't actually meet the needs of individuals in the slightest, not by any stretch of the imagination, because it doesn't care about the individuals, right? So welfare is the government at gunpoint, because ultimately that's what it is. If you don't pay your taxes, what do? They come and they take you down by force. It's that simple. At gunpoint if need be. Right? Off to prison you go. Okay? That is the final analysis. Right? You first get a letter, you get a fine, you get whatever, and in the final analysis they come and they take you away by force. Right? So it's the government using force and coercion, you will give us the money, and you have no say in the matter, and you have no say in how it's spent. And whether the program succeeds or fails, no matter how often we prove ourselves completely incompetent to actually remedy the society's problems, you will perpetually be forced to give us money regardless. End of story. And here's something very interesting. What a lot of people don't realize is that one of the reasons the Roman Empire fell was because the Roman Empire eventually became a welfare state. And here's the problem. When you just throw money at people, charity seeks to uplift the individual through mechanisms tailor-made for the individual in order to help the individual become independent and stand on their own 2 feet. The government and welfare, the only thing it does is creates people who become dependent on the system. Welfare creates perpetual slaves because it doesn't actually help them rise out of their situation at all. Okay? And you're seeing this, and you're seeing this more and more, right? So one of the things that the government spends the welfare budget on is pensions, for example, right? And people have been speaking. Here's an article on MoneyWise, for example, and this you can find all over the place. I mean, you can Google it and you'll see it, right? A UK state pension fund could run out as soon as 2030. The money's gone, right? No more pensions. 2032, money's gone. What are they doing with that money, right? Because you pay the money in so that when you retire, right, you give that money, so that when you retire, you've got a little bit of money to sit back on. Okay, right. But the problem is that we young people are paying for the next generation, are paying for the current generation. We're supporting the current generation, and then by the time we get there, it's then the up and coming generation that's going to support us when we're older. But because the government keeps on interfering with things, and you've got things like inflation, because you've got a fraudulent currency and all of that sort of thing, you've got let's not even get started on the whole the central bank system and all that's just money. They can just print money, and it's a disaster. And so the money's just running out because they just completely. It's unsustainable. The system is completely and utterly unsustainable. Once upon a time, it would be that when you got older, you were looked after. Whatever resources that you had, and if you were unable to work and all of that sort of thing, the resources that you had would stay within the family, and your family, your kids, your children, your grandchildren, the larger community would look after you, and you would thrive in old age because you still had something to do at home to actually then be with the family, and those resources would stay within the family. Right? Nowadays, because we're so isolated and fragmented as communities, people no longer have that. I mean, I was reading some statistics the other day on how many old people out there are just completely lonely and abandoned. Right? And people jump up and down and say, well, welfare is necessary, otherwise these old people would be completely abandoned and would have no one to look after them. Well, they're abandoned even now anyway. And the only reason why they're like that is because the government has gotten involved and stuck its nose and meddled in the family unit. So nowadays you've got the communities have completely dissolved and become dysfunctional. And the reason communities are dissolved and dysfunctional is because the government got involved in community issues. And the reason why that's dissolved is because the family unit has completely dissolved and become corrupted and dysfunctional. And one of the reasons for that as well is because the government got involved in that too. Right? Marriage is no longer sacrosanct at all. And that's because the government lent ears to all the activists, because they say that marriage is oppressive. and all of these kinds of things. So let's adultery used to be considered by the government as an offense, that you would lose certain rights if you committed. No, now you can go and you can do whatever you want and be as irresponsible as you want, and hurt whoever you want, and families are collapsing, and young girls are now, because young girls, if they grow up in a dysfunctional family because they know that there's no morality anymore, the family unit collapses, so the young girls want to jump out. So how do they jump out? Well, they know that they can depend on the state's welfare to support them. So rather than marry a decent man, all they do is they marry the state. So they go out, they get themselves impregnated by some yob who's also got no morality and no sense of responsibility, and the state will just give them a house and give them money for the children. And that's why, and that's a big problem here in the UK, where you've got teenage girls running around all over the place, got 3, 4, 5, 6 children, each and every single one of them from a different man. Right? And that problem's not going to go away, because they're going to raise their children, because these girls are dysfunctional, and these girls are, and you see them. In the US, you guys call them like rednecks, right? It's probably not, it's bad to generalize, but you guys call them rednecks. Over here in the UK, we call them chavs, right? Those real sort of bottom of the barrel people who, and you can't really, it's not really entirely their fault, because if you don't have the advantage of being raised in a decent family and being taught certain things by decent, loving parents, you can't expect that these kids are going to grow up and make better decisions when they were raised like barn animals, and which is what a lot of us have experienced that. Those of us that have been raised in dysfunctional families, parents that didn't care, parents were abusive, and the kind of hell it is to try and make something of yourself when you're an adult, and to try and break those bad habits that were put into you by your parents. It's really, really tough. So, the government giving the government money and all of that sort of thing, the government squanders it completely, because the government does not operate on the principle of charity. There's no love there, right? And for a lot of people, they're like, well, if the government doesn't do it, no one will do it. Well, people have always been charitable, first of all. Getting the government involved is not going to solve the problem. In fact, most of the problems exist because the government keeps on getting involved in things. And all activism that happens today, all over the place, whether it's environmentalism, whether it's LGBT, whether it's feminism, every single one of them are lobbying the government to take more control over the personal lives of individuals in order to bring about the changes that these people want. That's all they do. Right? Because the government can't do anything unless you allow it control over things. And the more control it has over things, well, the more it can squander things. But the problem is, once you let the government in, you can't get it out, because now it's law, and they can do whatever they want, and you can't kick them out. Here's an article. The government made me squander £66,000 on rotten pension. Politicians and their bright ideas. And thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people have been left out of pocket or destitute, and because of stupid government programs that tell you, well, now you need to buy this annuity and you need to invest in that. It's because they know they're running out of money, because they know they've got a system that is completely unsustainable. It's unbelievable, and we just don't seem to get it, and that's all they do. And that's why when I was invited for this thing to go and protest because the government's not doing enough for homelessness, I refused to go. I will not go and protest, because every single protest, its aim is to lobby the government to get more involved. You do not want the government to get more involved in anything, because the government will not. Government will not make it better. It never has. It never will. Most of the problems exist because of the government. Right? Why is it so hard to... Have you ever... Go and try and starting a business. You've got to put up with licensing. You've got to... And licensing and all these regulations. I've actually tried to start a business. I've actually started a business. I've got a business name. I did it with a buddy of mine. And the hoops that you've got to jump through. And depending on what type of business that you want to start, I mean, here's an interesting example. The employment as a driver, right? Being a driver is the number one employment for men, I think, almost globally, is being a driver. Just driving, whether it's taxi, whether it's vehicle, whatever, lorries, whatever it is. One of the biggest employment for men in the world. But if you want to, let's say, start a taxi, right? Why not? You know, I want to start, and Uber is an interesting example for this. And Uber has come into a few problems, right? Especially like if you talk about central London and stuff like that, because the unions want to keep them out. A union is is people pretending to be charitable, saying, "Oh, we're here for our employers," right? And what they do is they stultify, they lobby the government in order to bring in licensing legislation, which pushes up the price to ridiculous extents in order for you to get a license in order to operate in London and in big cities and things of that sort. Which basically, and it's specifically designed to keep people out of a particular industry. That's not free market. Right? So if you want to go and I believe it's the same problem in places like New York and other big cities like that, where the average guy, let's say the average guy on the street, if he's a bit destitute and stuff like that, and he's like, well, let me get a car and maybe start doing something like that. It's almost impossible. You can pretty much forget about it because you are priced out of the market, and that's not free market. That's because the government has gotten in, because you've got trade unions. Trade unions is they just lobby the government. That's all they do, and they lobby the government in the interest of the trade union, not in the interest of the people. No. Don't believe that. Never ever believe that someone who's lobbying the government for anything has got your best interest in mind. No. Because anyone who actually cares about you as an individual will never go to the government. It's like, no, the government, you stay there, me and you, we man to man will negotiate to make things better. As a community, as a people, will help solve problems. So that's the difference between charity and welfare. One is out of love, the other one is out of coercion. And it's an excuse to gain power. It's an excuse to gain power, right? The president, you're having an election. I'm going to do this for the poor people. I'm going to do this for the that people. Hey, and all these promises. And then as soon as we're like, yeah, okay, we'll put them in. It was stupid. Like it's always the same thing, isn't it? You know, I mean, even Trump now, he's gone back on certain things. And if you look at his budget, his spending, how much money he's giving to Planned Parenthood, some millions, right? And one of the reasons he won is because he's supposed to be conservative and against abortion and all these kinds of things, and people are now looking at him like, dude, you went back on your word. Well, duh, come on, right? Get in power, and then they forget about you as the people, right? And by the way, if you look at the abortion issue is one of the ways of controlling populations. First of all, it's eugenics. It was started by the eugenics movement. But here's the thing. It's cheaper to kill the babies off before they're born than have the babies born, because then it ends up costing the government even more. Because a child that lives and grows up to these irresponsible people that just want to go around and shag all over the place and take no responsibility. So these children end up becoming the problem of the state, and the state would rather not spend money to support these children who end up they're born to dysfunctional people. they end up becoming dysfunctional themselves, will likely end up in poverty and in various types of destitution and issues, which means they then become the government's problem, because again, we've lost the community. The community, human individuals, no longer actually care about each other anymore. So no one actually helps these people out. And you're not even allowed to say a lot of these things. You're not allowed to say that someone's dysfunctional anymore. It's politically incorrect. So what's the solution? Well, allow abortion, because you kill the problem off before it becomes a problem. Right? The whole abortion issue, it's a eugenics issue. It's population control. That's what it is. It has nothing to do with women's rights and control over my body and all those brainless, idiotic mantras that these feminists go out there and chant. It has nothing to do with that. Right? There's a reason why the government has an interest in allowing abortion. It's because it saves them money in the long run. Whatever millions that they give to organizations like Planned Parenthood and whatever the case might be, is actually an investment, because it means by killing off these children, you save money at the end of the day. Because then those children don't grow up to be dysfunctional as well and subsequently dependent on the state welfare system. And I mean, a lot of people, when if they grow up in dysfunctional homes, they become dysfunctional. Not only do they end up impoverished and things like that. Like, for example, if you grow up in a single mother household, your chances of being abused and ending up in poverty and ending up in criminality, they completely skyrocket. And so then the government has a problem with criminality and all these kinds of things. It's just one of those things. And you can go out and you can look. The higher the rates of illegitimacy, that means children born to parents who are not married or just not even together at all. The higher the rate of illegitimacy, the higher the rate of criminality, the higher the rate of all social problems in that particular community. Right? Why? Because the family's been done away with. And where there's no decent family, there's no love. Where there's no love, there's no community cohesion and all that sort of thing. It's an absolute disaster. Well, get the government involved, huh? What does the Bible have to say? And here's the thing, right? One thing that really it grates my cheese, right? If I can use that expression, grates my cheese, because a lot of Christians, and I apologize for the harshness with I'm about to say this, but I don't see any other way. A lot of Christians are stupid enough to fall for this, even though we have the Bible that puts all of the moral parameters as plain as day, right? Christians, through their sentimentalism and ignorance, are stupid enough to fall for these programs, right? And I see, even in my own church communities, no matter which country, right? You get people, here's where they pass around in the church, here's a petition to the government, so get the government to do this and get the government to do that. It's like, excuse me, where in the Bible does it say, lobby the government to do absolutely everything for you? What happened to community and individual responsibility within the community for the community, and the community responsibility to the individual? What happened to that? What happened to actually caring about your fellow man? Because this is the thing, right? With welfare, it's just give the government the money and it becomes their problem. It means I don't have to do anything. I don't have to take any time. It's laziness is what it is, right? And it's actually one of the reasons that atheists have a problem with Christians, right? Because they're all like about, love and being Christ-like, right? Yet these people often, like you have the story about the Good Samaritan in the Bible, right? Where it's the religious people, they'll step over the man in the street, right? That's probably why Christians are falling for all of this rhetoric, because a lot of them probably actually don't care. They don't even know what actual charity is anymore, and they're ignorant enough to think that welfare is the same thing as charity. Just get the government involved. But what does the Bible have to say about the government? We can find out. We can find out very easily. If you go to the Old Testament, 1 Samuel chapter 8, and we will start at verse 5. And now this is Israel talking to Samuel, the prophet Samuel. And they said unto him, Behold, verse 5, Thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. All right, Samuel's sons were a little bit dodgy. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. Now here's the thing. God never intended for Israel to have a king. Right? The system that he organized, if you read in Exodus, the system that he organized under Moses, where there was a constitution. Hello, Americans. There was a constitution, which is the Ten Commandments, and that the structure of the society was such that you upheld the constitution, and you had a very, very representative sort of structure from all the way from the lowest levels. You had people who were in charge of tens, 50s, hundreds, thousands, and so on and so forth. Very, very representative form of government and all that sort of thing. So, and then right at the top was Moses. And then not just Moses, but you had then the Levites, who were the spiritual people, who also, just the whole structure was really, 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 really very, very well thought out. But it now had become completely corrupted. And they're like, now we want a king, right? Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. So they are like, we want to be like the other nations. Never mind that the other nations were corrupt as all heck, right? Okay? Child sacrifice, all the pagan kind of stuff that used to go on. You can't even imagine, right? But we want a king like they do. And God's like, are you sure? Verse 6, but the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. So rather than accept the structure, the civil structure that God had placed, where ultimately God was at the head of everything, they said, no, we want a man. We want a human being in charge. Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said unto Samuel, hearken unto the voice of the people, in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. So when we sometimes ask, why does God allow bad things to happen? It's because we asked him to do so. You see, yeah, what is God doing? He says, listen to them, give them what they want. Don't worry, Samuel, they haven't rejected you, they've rejected me. So when we say, get the government involved, what exactly are we rejecting? What exactly are we asking for? Do we know what we're asking for? Are we really asking for justice and charity? And the people that are saying increase the size of the government, because the only way that the government can come into people's lives in order to micromanage every little thing so that no one ever offends anyone else and no one ever harms anyone else, the only way the government can do that is if it ever increasingly expands the scope, the breadth and width of its power and influence over every aspect of your life through legislation. And let me tell you, once the government is in, you can't get rid of it. Can't do it. Oh, well, unless you have a war and a revolution that kills thousands of people. And we've seen it happen in the 20th century. Communism. Hello, communism, and so on and so forth. And socialism. And they want to bring that back. We don't learn, do we? No. And they use the same rhetoric. They use the exact same rhetoric that was used in the 20th century to bring in communism and all that kind of stuff. All that propaganda, they're using the same thing now when they want to bring in socialism in and stuff like that. It's unbelievable. The exact same thing, right? And people are falling for it because the people are pretending to have love for the poor. They don't actually care about the poor, right? And that's how they're bringing all this socialism. Never mind that it killed 150 million, maybe more people in the 20th century. Never mind that, right? Let's try it again. And who are their people? Oh, it's because of the poor. It's because of the suffering. Never mind that all of those people who are poor and suffering now, socialism and communism and all of these kinds of things, the only equality it makes, right, is two types of equality. You're either dead or about to die. That's the only equality that all of these kinds of things give, because they're not godly. They're not based on charity. They're based on government having all the power. That's it. And putting a man in charge of everything. It says, give them what they want. They have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works, this is now verse 8, according to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee. Now therefore, hearken unto their voice, listen to what they're saying. Howbeit yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign to them. So here's what God is saying, right? He's like, do what they say. Do what they ask. But don't just do it blindly. Protest and say to them, listen, I'll give you what you want, but warn them about what the king is going to end up doing to them. Right? Tell them about the consequences of these actions. And this is kind of like what I'm doing to you guys now. All those of you who think that you can go and protest and all the activism and lobby for the government to bring in welfare and this false sentimentality because are we doing it because we care about the downtrodden, right? I'm warning you because here these people are doing the exact same thing, right? Because the sons of Samuel were corrupt and oppressive, and they're saying, give us a king, right? The sons, if we go back right to the beginning, it says here in verse 1, and it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel, right? And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted judgment, so that it had become corrupt, right? And then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel unto Ramah and said unto him, behold, and so this is when so there had been some corruption going on, and now they're asking, because of this corruption, look at us, we're the downtrodden, look at all these poor people who are suffering now because of these guys. So give us a king, give us a state, because it's like human beings are already failing us, but the remedy for this is let's not return to godly ways, no, right? Because that's too extreme, right? Give us yet another human being who's equally as corruptible and give him unilateral power to reign over us, because this is somehow going to make things better, right? We're doing the same thing right now. And Samuel told all the words. So now we're going back. Let's go back to verse 9, just to recap. Now therefore hearken unto their voice, howbeit yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner, show them what kind of king that shall reign over them. And Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king. Right, now here's the warning. This is what he says. Verse 11. And he said, this will be the manner, this will be the kind of king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen. And some shall run before his chariots. And he will appoint them up, and he will appoint him captains over thousands and captains over 50s, and will set them to ear his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make instruments of war and instruments of his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be confectionaries, and to be cooks, and to be bakers. And he will take your fields, and your vineyards, and your oliveyards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. Those people in South Africa, are you living in South Africa? If you're living in South Africa, you know all about this, right? Right? The cronies, this is crony capitalism going on here, right? Capitalism is not the problem. It's fascism, basically, right? Another word for crony capitalism is actually fascism, right? A lot of people complain about the state of the economy today, and they say the capitalism is corrupt. What we have today is not free market capitalism. It's crony capitalism, and another name for crony capitalism is, in fact, fascism, where you have these big monopolies and they work together with the government in order to do whatever they want, right? And in South Africa, you have that issue, right? The ANC comes in, and who gets all of the best jobs? Who gets all of the tenders? If you are buddy-buddy with the president and all of his cronies, then you get to do whatever you want. You can't even get arrested if you murder people. You can literally get away with murder in South Africa. It's actually really easy. The vast majority of murders in South Africa go unsolved, right? If you are the type of person that likes to murder and want to get away with it, move to South Africa. Easy as pie. right? And those of you in South Africa, you'll know exactly. Anyone who lives in a very, very corrupt country, and you can go even into the history books, right? You go to the Soviet Union and stuff like that, right? Who's the one that gets all the nice positions of power? Who gets all of the best houses, the best lands, the best everything, right? It's all the people in government. Even today, even in the West, right? You have all these politicians earning fantastic amounts of money. And then when they retire, we continue to pay for their retirement, their pension, and their pension is fantastic amounts of money, while the rest of us who are paying for that pension, right, we are going to be told when the kitty runs out, well, sorry, we've got no more money for you. Right? And he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. Right? Does he care much about the people here? And he will take the 10th of your seed and of your vineyards, and give to his officers and to his servants. And he will take your men servants and your maid servants and your goodliest young men, and your asses, your donkeys, your mules, and things like that, and put them to work. Maybe this is what I mean. Work your ass off, huh? I'm sorry. Oh dear. He will take the 10th of your sheep, and you shall be his servants. And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which ye shall have chosen for yourselves. And the Lord will not hear you in that day. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. And they said, Nay, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. Right? So let's go and protest and get the government to go and fight our battles for us. And this is what the political activism is doing. Right? Lobby the government so that they can form legislation so that they can go out and fight our battles for us. And by battles, I don't just mean overseas battle like we have in the Middle East. No. Go and fight. Dear government, go and fight homelessness for us. Dear government, please go and educate our children for us. Dear government, please go and take over our medical institutions and manage our medical institutions for us. Dear government, go and do everything for us. We'll give up all of our freedoms as long as you can go and look after everything for us. I mean, what are we doing? We're just doing we're doing the same thing, right? Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, Nay, but we will have a king over us. And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he rehearsed them in the ears of the Lord. So he reported back. And the Lord said to Samuel, Hearken unto their voice, and make them a king. And Samuel said unto the men of Israel, Go ye every man unto the city. And the story carries on from there. And let me tell you, Israel suffered. Israel suffered. Actually, there wasn't a single king. Some kings were better than others. But if you read what happened from that point on, because the first king was Saul, if you read what that man did, and even what David ended up doing, and then what Solomon ended up doing, and all the rest of them, and how from that point on, Israel did nothing but fragment and get worse and get worse and get worse and get worse, and it was a disaster. Having a king did nothing for them. Had nothing for them. Now let me read you something here, because again, people like to protest. People like to quote the Bible, right? They like to quote the Bible which says, but we need to take care of the widows and the orphans. Therefore, we need charity. No, not charity. Welfare. We need welfare because the government is going to do it, right? And if the government doesn't do it, no one's going to do that. When someone says, to you, if the government doesn't do it, no one will do it. What they're actually saying, if the government doesn't do it, I won't do it because I can't be bothered. Right? Because the charitable way, the godly way, the biblical way is that the burdens of society, the individual, we willingly take upon ourselves with our neighbor, the man on the street that we can see, the man on the street who we know, right? And we can help them as individuals. Okay? Welfare is basically removing all of this responsibility from the community and putting it onto a bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy will do whatever it wants. Once you give the power over to the bureaucracy, that's it. Your freedoms are gone. Your freedoms are gone. And even the people who are in welfare, there's no dignity for the people who are having to depend on welfare. There's no dignity for those people, right? You're not making anything better. Right? And there's a lot of people, despite all of this ridiculous welfare spending, there's still homeless people all over the place. There's still underprivileged people all over the place. There's still people receiving fraudulent education all over the place. It's the weirdest thing. In the UK, right, they're called the English because this is where the English or the English language came from, right? And I was listening to, there's a LBC, right? LBC Talk Radio a little while ago. It's actually pretty good because when I first moved to this country, I'm like, well, I'm in the UK. I need to learn. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. So I thought, let me listen to a talk radio because I get to know what people think, how they feel. And they were talking about this thing where they were this huge problem where the literacy of people was so bad that because there was a massive shopping center that needed to be built, and they wanted to recruit builders and so on and so forth. And they said that the literacy of the people in this country was so bad, right? English people, not just foreigners, but English-speaking people, was so bad that they couldn't even fill out the application forms properly. So in the country where English came from, they can barely speak English or read or write English well enough to fill out their own job applications. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. I mean, sometimes even at work, I use words. I'm a foreigner, as you can hear my accent. I'm a foreigner, and sometimes when I'm speaking to, and I haven't always been English speaking. I was raised. My parents didn't speak a word of English when they moved to South Africa, so for a good portion of my formative years, nothing but Portuguese was spoken in the house. I eventually learned it at school and all that sort of thing. But people who have been lifelong speakers of English, I sometimes use words and they look at me, they're like, what? What is that word? Unbelievable. That's what you get when the government gets involved in education, or when the government gets involved in anything, right? And because the community, there's no responsibility. They give it all up to the government. Now, here's the thing, right? I was saying about Christians being ignorant enough to go along with this, right? So they say, well, if the government doesn't do it, and, the people, they need to be looked after, that the care for thy brethren, love thy neighbor. They quote all of these things as if they know what they're actually talking about, right? They quote all of these verses in the Bible. Oh, we need to help the people. And that's the most reprehensible thing, is that all of this activism is actually preying on the decency of people and taking them for fools, to give power over to corrupt systems that are actually not going to improve the situation at all. If anything, make it worse. So anyway, for you people, especially, I'm part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and we have a lady who's both a co-founder and a prophet in our church. And if you're a Seventh-day Adventist, you'd better pay attention to this quote, because this is from the pen of Ellen White. This comes from Desire of Ages. It's a book called The Desire of Ages. I highly, highly recommend you get this book. I don't care who you are, and read it. Have a look. So this is what Ellen White says in the Desire of Ages, right? Let me quickly give you a context. The time that Jesus lived in and grew up in, it was under a king named Herod, king of Israel, Herod. And if you go and study the historical literature about what this king was like, he was unbelievably brutal. Probably the most vicious king that Israel ever had. And he got into power. He got into power because he was corrupt enough and fandangled his way by appealing to the Roman state, doing favors to the Roman state and all that sort of thing. And then the Roman state eventually favored him, and that's how he came into power. And once he was in power, he corrupted everything. Absolutely corrupted everything. And it's one of the reasons why, old John the Baptist goes to him and says, "Hey, you're marrying your brother's wife there. What you doing? This is not right." And he eventually lost his head for that. That's what you get when you want to put someone up on high like that, right? And he corrupted the religious system. He basically wiped out all the decent people and put in religious heads that agreed with him and that followed what he said. And these were the people that eventually executed Jesus. So this guy was so brutal, it was unbelievable. And they lived under the oppression of the Roman state. And so when you read the Bible, you have people regularly coming to Jesus, saying to Jesus, should I pay taxes? And constantly trying to find an excuse to rebel against this oppressive state and this oppressive regime that was making them suffer, right? Constantly trying to find excuses, which then it eventually leads to the famous phrase where they come to Jesus and they said, "Should we pay our taxes?" And Jesus says, "Whose face is on that coin?" And they're like, "Well, it's Caesar's face." And he's like, "Well, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's." So here we have an interesting separation of church and state here. Right? The government is the government, but you as an individual, you need to take responsibility for yourself. So unto God that which is God's. If you do the godly thing, you as a community with principles, higher principles of morality and so on and so forth, you need to look after yourselves, because that's the only thing that's going to work. That's the only thing that's going to get you out of problems. Don't think that by rebelling against the state or because you have people, they always go to one or two extremes. They either want to rebel against the state and go into some sort of anarchy type thing or social or some revolution, or they want to appeal to the state. So whether you're rebelling or appealing to the state, both are wrong. Both are wrong. And you're playing with fire. You have no idea what you're playing with, right? Leave the government alone, right? There are means and ways through legitimate things, right? Like getting involved in jurisprudence, for example, is good. Legislations, give your opinion on the legislations. That's a good idea. But other than that, you're playing with fire. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, right? You're playing with a dragon there, man. So here's what Ellen White says in The Desire of Ages, right? Pay careful attention, especially if you're an Adventist. You've got no excuse to be ignorant. The government under which Jesus lived was corrupt and oppressive. On every hand were crying abuses, extortion, intolerance, and grinding cruelty. Yet the Saviour attempted no civil reforms. He attacked no national abuses, nor condemned the national enemies. He did not interfere with the authority or administration of those in power. He who was our example kept aloof from earthly governments, not because he was indifferent to the woes of men, but because the remedy did not lie in merely human and external measures. To be efficient, the cure must reach men individually and must regenerate the heart, not by the decisions of courts or councils or legislative assemblies, not by the patronage of worldly great men is the kingdom of Christ established, but by the implanting of Christ's nature in humanity through the work of the Holy Spirit. As many as receive him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name, which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. That's a quote out of John 1:12-13, and verse 12 and 13. Here is the only power that can work the uplifting of mankind. And the human agency for the accomplishment of this work is the teaching and practicing of the Word of God. When the Apostle Paul began his ministry in Corinth, that populous, wealthy, and wicked city, polluted by the nameless vices of heathenism, he said, I determined not to know anything among you, save Jesus Christ and Him crucified. 1 Corinthians 2:2. Writing afterward to some of those who had been corrupted by the foulest sins, he could say, But ye are washed, but ye are sanctified, but ye are justified in the name of the Lord Jesus, and by the Spirit of our God. I thank my God always on your behalf for the grace of God which is given you by Jesus Christ. Now, today, as in Christ's day, the work of God's kingdom lies not with those who are clamoring for recognition and support by earthly rulers and human laws, but with those who are declaring to the people in His name those spiritual truths that will work in the receivers the experience of Paul. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yea, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. Galatians 2:20. Then they will labor as Paul did for the benefit of men. He said, Now then, we are ambassadors for Christ. As though God did beseech you by us, we pray you in Christ's stead. Be ye reconciled to God. 2 Corinthians 5:20. I'm going to read the next little bit as well. Those who have charge of our institutions and our schools should guard themselves diligently, lest by their words and sentiments they lead the students into false paths. Does this sound like our universities today? With all the leftist rubbish that's going on and all the activism that's going on campus? Everything has become political. Absolutely. Even the churches are becoming political. Those who teach the Bible in our churches and in our schools are not at liberty to untie in making apparent their prejudices for or against political men or measures, because by doing so they stir up minds of others, leading each to advocate his favorite theory. There are among those professing to believe present truth some who will thus be stirred up to express their sentiments and political preferences, so that division will be brought into the church. And man, you've got that. Whether you are conservative, whether you are Democrat, whatever, just forget about that garbage. Politics is not going to help you. Politics does nothing but destroy everything. And yet we are determined to consistently increase its power and influence over every aspect of our lives through legislation. And what accomplishes that? The false narratives that are peddled by these activist groups, because none of them ever mention morality. None of them speak about morality ever. None of them speak about morality. None of them actually talk about actually loving your fellow neighbor and actually getting involved yourself with your fellow neighbor. It's like no. Lobby the government for legislation. It's constantly legislation. And who funds them? People with political interests, to give the government certain types of power because it serves them. It doesn't serve the people. People will take him for a ride. There was an atheist who wrote a very famous piece or article. And in that article he confessed that because he had been to Africa and he saw the problems in Africa. And what do people say? How do we solve the problems in Africa? Well, welfare. Just throw money at the problem. How's that turned out? And in his opinion, he was an atheist. And in his own words, he said, Africa needs God. Because there's something that Christianity, that morality, that a Christ-like nature in the human heart can do, that nothing else can do. No government, no welfare institution, no nothing. And only God and Christ in your heart that will change you into a person who actually loves, who actually cares, who actually acts out of charity, and through that you will be compelled from within to go out and help your fellow man. If you don't teach people how to actually love each other, you can't force people to love each other. You know, you have people saying, no, we need to formulate these laws to get rid of racism. You can't legislate morality. You don't make a racist stop being racist by making a law banning him from being racist. The only difference, he's going to continue being a racist. He'll just be it privately, and he's still going to act out his racism in ways in which he can't be caught. And that goes with everything. Every single one of these institutions today, all of this activism, all of this welfare, all of it, all this government stuff, it's all completely railed against Christianity. The Christian moral, the Christian ethic, the Christian principle. That's why the West used to be great. That's why the West used to prosper, because we had proper ethics. The family was intact. We had charities, not welfare centers. And we would look after people. People who wanted to do that, not because they had some financial or political incentive, but because they actually cared about other people. And this is not to say that there aren't people working in the political system that don't actually care about people, that are there because they really, really want to make a difference. But you can talk to those people who are involved in government institutions of welfare and stuff like that, and they'll tell you it's dysfunctional. They're in there because there's nowhere else to be. Right? They're like, well, I'm going to just power on and I'm going to suffer on because maybe I can make a difference. But every single one of them, they'll tell that are not the administrators, because the administrators will spin you a lie that it's all wonderful. Well, why? Because it means they continue having a job and they continue being relevant. But the people, the social workers and those people that are at the ground level, they'll tell you the system is so completely corrupt and ineffective. It's unbelievable. Most of the time, and I personally know people that have been through orphanages and who have lived in foster. I personally know people who have been in foster care and all of these kinds of things, and the system is miserable and evil. How many of them end up getting abused in these places? They go to these places, they end up getting abused, and the government doesn't solve any problems, and then they get sent back to an abusive home. So they get abused at the government institution, and then they get sent right back home, back to the abusers, because the system is incompetent. But no, just keep on giving them money. You can't solve problems with money. You cannot solve problems with money. You can only solve problems with charity, with agape love for your brothers and your sisters, whoever they might be, wherever they might be, by getting personally involved. Not this stupidity, this marching in the streets, blocking traffic and smashing things up left, right and center with little placards chanting slogans and mantras. The only thing that mantras are good for brainless people who neither know nor care to know the subtleties about why things happen in society, the small intricacies of human nature and how we interact with each other, and what makes a person fail or what makes a person succeed, and the family, what this person was like growing up. Maybe they had a disadvantage, not because of some imagined oppressive system, but because their family was dysfunctional. Because the father was alcoholic and beat them up, and that's why they strange and didn't get a success in life, because they had no one to help them out, you know. And some people managed it regardless. So there's a difference between charity and welfare. It's not the same thing. Not the same thing. And Christians, you know, Christians made the West what it is. and through their stupidity and their arrogance, because they refuse to see, they're allowing it to sink down the hole. They're willing to support activism that will, like in the States, to rip up the Constitution. That is the only protection against complete ridiculousness. When that Constitution is gone, you guys are in for problems, let me tell you. And those of us in the rest of the world that don't have strong constitutions like that, well, we're gonna see things come unhinged. The whole EU business, the immigration and fighting between, like the Muslims and all the terrorist stuff that's going on, and it's gonna fall to pieces. And no one's willing to take responsibility. It's always someone else's fault. It's the white male patriarchy. It's always a white male patriarchy's fault. Yeah, that's just racism by most of it's just a different kind of racism. It's just against white people. It's unbelievable. And as a person of mixed race or whatever, I'm a pavement special. I'm telling you, I get disgusted when I hear these things. Totally disgusted. I've had people come up to me. They don't know me for a bar of soap, but because they see that I'm some kind of minority, they want to apologize for all the injustices that their privilege has done to me. I've actually had people do that. Apologize for the injustices that their privilege has put me in. It's like, you don't even know me, you fool. What arrogance. Right? You want to know what's been detrimental to me in my life? Dysfunctional family. Godlessness. That's what's held me back in life. My own stupidity. Because I was godless. And because I was angry. Because of things that happen in my life. Dysfunctional family. Who themselves came from dysfunctional families. Because of a long lineage of people that pretended to be religious but weren't. They were Christian or whatever in name only. Those things hurt me more than any patriarchy or any white supremacy has ever done. Or any government, anything. There's people who don't take personal responsibility, and people who are dysfunctional and messed up and arrogant and narcissistic. Or my own arrogance and narcissistic because I was either raised by or influenced by or told by activism that I had the right to be by activists that I had the right to be angry and narcissistic and blame everyone else for my problems rather than take responsibility. The only reason why I am where I am today is because I abandoned all of that. And maybe if I take responsibility and work hard and actually develop a little bit of love, not only for myself but my fellow man, maybe I'll get somewhere. And that's what happened. We're on the downhill trajectory on this manner, and the churches are among the culprits. Because they're not making the distinction between welfare and charity at all, and this evil philosophy, this political garbage is coming to the church in unmitigated ways. We have here in the UK, black representatives from Black Lives Matter have been invited to speak at our churches. Right? A group that promotes a group that espouses violent tactics is being invited to a church to come and speak to people. Right? Because this identity politics stupidity has come in, and it's like, you have the right to hate X, Y, and Z because X, Y, and Z hated you whenever. That unity in Christ, that we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, is gone. That love for your fellow man is gone. I've had people say that because of slavery, I will not go and spread the gospel to white people. Because they, whatever. You don't find those things in the Bible. That love, that godly love that you're supposed to have for absolutely everyone, no matter what, is gone. It's being eroded. And these people are jumping up and down. In the United States, some of our because our church has universities, they are inviting people like Al Sharpton, a race baiter of special magnificence, reprehensible, inviting people like that. It's not like, and we don't have a shortage of preachers, mind you, right? But inviting political activists like Al Sharpton and all of these race baiters with political agendas, inviting them to speak at our institutions. And their preaching is not one of charity. It's not one of godliness. It's not one that's based on scripture. It's not one that heals divisions, but creates divisions. And this is being invited into our churches, and I'm pretty sure that happens in other denominations as well. This is reprehensible garbage. This is the devil in himself being invited into our institutions, and it's causing us to be less effective than we should be. And this garbage is poisoning the minds of our youth, because this is the problem. We poison the minds of our youth. They will do one of two things. They will either grow up in the church, and once they become leaders, they will implement this garbage into the church and thus further corrupt the church. Or they will see this for what it is, because they will look at the church and look at the world, see no difference, and they'll be like, well, I might as well go into the world. And that's actually happening, because the churches are bleeding youth. Like we're hemorrhaging. It's like this open wound, and we're bleeding the youth from our churches because of anti-intellectual, superficial sentimentality, garbage, and they're going out into the world because they're trying to find something meaningful. Meanwhile, we're bringing this rot into the church, imagining that this is how we're going to attract the youth. And all we're doing is just hurting people and spreading lies, because this is not what charity and welfare have nothing to do with each other. And no self-respecting Christian, no Christian that even pretends to be Christian and have the love of Christ should get involved in any action, in any activity that de-emphasizes charity and increases the power of the state, whether it be through welfare or anything. Because all of these systems end up hurting the people that they pretend to want to help. And it's making their lives worse. It's robbing their independence, robbing them of their independence, robbing them of their dignity. It doesn't help. It doesn't help them. It doesn't help uplift them. As Christians, we're supposed to edify and uplift people. And you cannot do that unless you get personally involved with people in their own lives and actually go and talk to them as individuals and see, how can I help you as an individual? Because the government can only do generalized things, a one-size-fits-all thing. That's rubbish. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. Each person has their own individual story and needs to be met on their own level. And that's why when you read the Bible, Jesus Christ, where did he just go? He did two things. He spoke on the mountaintop, right, in the hill to the 5,000, but he spent most of his time going to individuals and speaking to individuals and spending time with individuals. You only have a few sermons where there's like massive crowds of people and stuff like that. But a lot of the times, going through the houses, going through the streets, and people would come and go, and visiting people at the houses, breaking bread with people on the street, reaching down himself, not appealing to some stupid politician that doesn't care about anything, somewhere you don't even know where he is. It was a gentleman, G.K. Chesterton. He says that politicians should be close enough to you so that you can kick them if they do something wrong. G.K. Chesterton. Chesterton. Brilliant mind. It's like politicians, if they're not close enough so that you can kick them, don't bother with them, right? But Jesus was there personally involved, right? Not appealing to the government, oh, government this and oppression that, and you must rebel. In fact, it was precisely because Jesus ended up prophesying that Israel was going to be destroyed by the Romans. And the reason why that happened is because is precisely because Israel, I think they were called the Zealots, rebelled viciously, and there were other factions as well, rebelled viciously against the Roman state, to the point where the Roman state came in and genocide virtually. Blood ran in the streets, wiped them out mercilessly under Emperor Titus, if I'm not mistaken. Under Emperor Titus came in and wiped them out. Exactly as Jesus prophesied when he said, listen, when you see X and Y and Z, get out, because these people are about to come in and they're going to wipe you out. And the reason why the Romans did that is because rebellion, because they didn't listen to what Jesus said, and they didn't find it go with his example. It's about a change in people's hearts. Legislation is not going to change people's hearts. The government is not going to change people's hearts. You change people's hearts, and you change the world through charity, through care, through actual love of your fellow man. Otherwise, forget it. We're going to end up in another civil war, and society. We're going to end up back in the Dark Ages, where there's going to be revolutions. We're just going to kill people. 20th century all over again is what we're looking at. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that is all for today. I'm going to leave it at that. I think I've spoken long enough. I hope this makes sense to you. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you for your viewership, and we'll chat again soon. Cheerio.